Well, without further ado, I'm sure most of you know the drill by now, but we are going to dive into our recap of the episode before we discuss it. And we host that recap by itself separately. So if you're listening to the recap video right now and you want to hear our full thoughts, that video will be linked in the description below. Um, but my friend, if you would like to take us off today.
Yes. Just disclaimer, a lot happens in this episode. This is episode 59, somewhere out there. And like Will mentioned, this is the return to Team AOL. Picking up where we left off in the previous episode, where a teleportation spell, seemingly we don't know what ended up with the other party, but we are back immediately after the beginning of the Apogee Solstice, like I mentioned, with Team AOL. And they find themselves in this geyser-like, crater-like gorge of sorts. And similar to what we saw with the other group, the immediate reaction is, where is everybody? Like, I can't, like, where's Chetney? Where's FCG? Where's Fern? Where's Imogen? Laudna is worried that something might have happened to Imogen. And again, like we saw with the other group, they immediately start sending out sending spells that fizzle and go nowhere. We see Orem is going to try to use his sending stone to connect with Dorian, and it doesn't work. And also a message is sent to Caleb Widowgast, and again, it doesn't seem to work. So nothing new. We've become familiar from the previous episodes that because of this Apogee Solstice, that certain magics aren't working, and the party essentially not knowing where they are. There is a history check from Laudna where they surmise they might be in one of three locations, but ultimately decide they need higher ground to figure out kind of where they are, what's happening. It's the middle of the night. They do see Ruidus in the distance, and Orem begins to wonder if possibly they're on another continent. So as they climb the gorge, they're avoiding these exploding geysers and also a clicking sound of some sort of creature in the darkness that they're very much keen not to run into. They make it to this ledge towards the top of the gorge of this crater, and we meet one of our first guest characters. We have Amy Carrero, who rejoins the table as a new character.
Ooh.
Mona, who we come to find out later, her name is Denise. She is I just think of like the dwarven version of Ashton, because there was like the tattoo that instead of like, I love mom, it was just me. And it's this dwarven woman who immediately is like, who are you? What's going on? You guys look really bad, by the way. You look like you've been beat up. And they're kind of like, well, who are you? What's going on? Like, how did you get here? And they all very much realize they have a similar story in that they just, like, it's almost like they blinked and they were here. Mona tells a story about she was looking at her fiance, like from a distance, was like, hey, and then heard a voice, which we know is, Ludinus's voice, and then she was suddenly here. She doesn't know why. She offers some liquor to the group, and they're like, yeah, after what we've been through. And they continue to climb this crater, essentially talking about, who they are, Orm sort of giving Mona the down low, and also asks, like, is Mona your real name? Because Mona, there's this moment where they're like, so what is your name? And she's like, Mona. Kind of like a very I'm Ron Burgundy-esque way. Laudna is going to send out Pate to go to the bottom of the gorge, and then also just use Pate as sort of a scouter. But not much is figured out there. And they eventually make their way out of the crater into this amazing lush forest that is nearby. Among this forest, or I should say rather in the distance, is a series of mountains, one in particular that rises above all the others. It's this magnificently large mountain peak. And Orm tries to do a history check to kind of clock what it might be, and has a poor roll and is unable to remember what it could be from his background. But in the distance, sort of the edge of the forest landscape, they see some flickering lights, which I think might be a town, and they decide to maybe head that direction. But along the way, Mona sees in the distance a small, ruddy campfire. which they decide to sneak up on. And we have another guest who comes to the table, Utkarsh Embutkar. I think I said it right. I'm not sure if I did. I apologize if I didn't. But he joins the table as Bordor Dogson, a sheep herder. And in fact, as the group's coming up, he claims to be a sheep herder. I just tend to my flock. My dad's a sheep herder. But as the party's coming up, he reactively, in surprise, is going to cast a level 5 like lightning bolt or some kind of big attack. And Mona with a nat 20 takes half damage, but still takes 23 points of damage. And it's kind of like a sort of Mexican standoff, like what's going on here? And Border is very much skittish, and I have no idea what's going on. Please don't hurt me. He has this caravan of basically he explains that he was traveling all the way in Wildmount. His brother's been sick. His brother's had a fever for 3 weeks. He was bringing supplies. Again, heard this voice in his head, and boom, basically opened his eyes here. And interestingly enough, doesn't know magic, doesn't know how he got his magic, just suddenly is able to use it. And then also, they basically decided to like make camp for the night. There is also Ratchet. Was that like the deer or like some animal he had?
Yeah, they kept like basically calling it a reindeer.
Yeah. So he has a reindeer. Who's that?
Yeah.
Named Ratchet. And they basically decided to make camp. There is this funny moment where they're like, well, do we have any food? And Ashton's like, oh yeah, I'll jump into the hole and get some food. And they forget that a bunch of the mercenaries from their attack at the dig site where the Apogee Solstice was happening, a bunch of dead mercenaries are in the hole. And so they start pulling out bodies, which Bordor immediately is like, are you guys bad
Who are you
people?
Yeah.
He's like, I promise. And Orm gives like a very genuine, very dad-esque, like, hey, we were doing something epic. These are the bad guys. We're the good guys. All this to say, there is another noise coming out from the woods, and we have our third guest character, Emily Axford, who joins the table as Prism. And I'm probably butchering it, but basically, I thought of kind of like a goth-styled elf. I think from the Shadowfell.
Yeah, she kept saying the Shadow Realm, but presumably the Shadowfell.
Okay, yeah. And very fun character, immediately comes in with like this clipboard and is like, excuse me, can I get I'm here to collect your thoughts on the Apogee Solstice. And she is with the Cobalt Soul, and apparently is sort of like this junior mage or assistant mage of some kind who has been sent off to gather feedback from the denizens of Exandria on their thoughts of the Apogee Solstice. Ashton's like, it sucks. I give it like a 1 star. Not good. And Prism has also a spell book named Dinios, I think.
I think so, yeah.
Was a former mage turned into a book and gifted to her as an assistant. And basically she gives more of a background, and in fact, in asking, sort of collecting this data, we do find out from Mona that Mona's real name is actually Denise, with a $sign as the S. And yeah, I think that's it. I think we break there before we come back to some more things that happen. Am I forgetting any other details?
No, just basically that the break happens basically right as this combat encounter is going to happen. Right. They hear something like in the woods, and so they're like, oh, another person, because they're all like all these people showing up, but in fact it's like this creature. Right. And that's where we go to break. And so good job, by the way, on the first half. We pick back up, and basically combat is beginning. We're rolling initiative, but there is this really funny moment where as like everyone's doing their last action preparing for this combat encounter, Laudna is like, I take my form of dread, all the tree roots come out, and she contorts her neck, and it's like I climb backwards up the tree. Yeah. And she does this right next to Bordor, who just like starts vomiting. He's so scared. It was really funny. So basically this
reminded me of other things from this combat that he does, but I won't spoil it.
So basically this combat encounter is versus these corpse flowers and and I didn't write the exact monster down, but I want to say shambling mound, some sort of mound. My apologies for not having it exactly. So people are rolling initiative. Prism immediately casts greater invisibility on herself and manifests mind on Dinios. Um, and also sends her raven, which she has, into combat to join Dinios. And her raven's name is Mother. Um, Again,
Yeah.
Bordor is screaming and vomiting. Um, but everyone rolls initiative. And for combat, you know the drill. We're just going to hit the highlights here. Um, but as everyone's attacking, they quickly realize that this creature is resistant to fire, which is a bit counterintuitive to what they expected, being like this plant monster.
Hmm.
We do see Ashton utilize their belt of momentum, which they got recently, or it's been so weird with the group splitting up. Maybe it
Right.
wasn't recently, but that gives them an extra d6 of damage due to like running up before a strike. So it was cool to see them use that. Um, and as this thing is taking damage, this mound, it's like shifting its shape and starts to take like a humanoid form at one point, and then that's when these corpse flower entities are also joining in on the fray. Prism, who again is invisible, is just casting spells from up in the trees through Dinios. Um, and this is her first, like, this is Emily Axford's like first, like real action as part of Critical Role. And she casts Steel Wind Strike and gets two natural 20s and a 26 on the damage rolls. So it's just
Yeah.
like immediate, just carnage. Uh, so that was awesome. Bordor is terrified and is just struggling this fight, going so far as to just literally lie prone because he's
Yeah.
so scared, to make himself a smaller target.
Everyone else is like,
Meanwhile,
"Are you sure you lie down prone in the combat?" He's like,
like,
"Oh yeah."
yeah, yeah. Meanwhile, we have Denise, who is this really cool bard, or not bard, excuse me, barbarian rogue, multi-class, just going in and doing like crazy damage, sneak attack as a barbarian. It's really cool. So she and Ashton are kind of like taking turns, like pummeling it. Um, Combat continues, and as it does, one of the corpse flowers, which is named such because it literally has like bodies inside of it. At one point, it's taking so much damage that it consumes one of the bodies inside of it to heal. So really cool encounter. Ultimately, Denise gets the "How do you want to do this?" on one of the plants, or excuse me, the final "How do you want to do this?" There's a few of them. The only other big thing in the combat is Orem gets eaten by the plant at one point, and Emily Axford immediately comes in with sending Dinios inside the plant and casting Dimension Door through it to get them just
Yeah.
both back out. Um, in the aftermath of the combat, they decide to set up camp and have a little bit more of discussions. Prism reveals that her raven mother is not actually her mother, but is named after the matron of ravens, who she says, people are all about in the Shadow Realm. Um, During the combat, the reindeer like ran away scared, so Laudna sends Pate to go out and scout and see if he can find it. And a lot of discussions here are happening. Where should they set up camp? What exactly should they do? And they basically come up with this plan to use the corpses that they had in the portable hole to set up as like a decoy camp in case there's any more monsters or anything out, that maybe that will get like their attention instead of their actual camp. So they set that up, and then they go head off and kind of find this nearby cave to actually sleep in. And once they're in there, the members of Bell's Hells basically catch up all of these new people on just what's been happening with them, with Ruidus, with the Apogee Solstice, and how this teleportation thing happened. They're basically just getting everyone up to speed on what's going on. And Bordor then says, "Hey, like what I'm trying to do is get to Pride's Call in Wildmount." And like he pulls out this like thing in his coat that he had that he said his dad wrote for him, which were like directions or like a reminder of where he's supposed to be going. And he's like, I don't know what's going on or who any of you people are, but like you seem to know what you're doing, so like, can I come with you? And at that point, they basically decide to, take the night's rest and have their different watches. So first up for watch, we have Bordor and Prism, who basically just make small talk about what they think about the gods after they, have been filled in by Team AOL. Like,
Mm.
should we get rid of the gods? Like, what do you think about this? And um, Border, or excuse me, Prism is like, your newfound magical powers like might be from a god. And he's like, yeah, I haven't even thought about that. And he reveals that he hasn't seen his mother in a very long time and doesn't really remember her that well. For next up watch, we have Ashton and Laudna, and this is just classic, awesome RP moments between these two, where Ashton is just checking in on Laudna with how she's doing, especially being separated from Imogen, and she's just compartmentalizing hard so that she doesn't break. And Ashton's like, you know what, you don't have to, like, you can talk to me. And she says, well, if I don't, like, I'm just gonna break and cry. And he comforts her and says, no matter what, we're gonna get them back, whatever it
Hmm.
takes. Like, you don't leave
Yeah.
anyone behind. Finally, we have Denise and Orem on the third watch, and Denise reveals a little bit about herself, saying that she got this box item from Gilmore, the same Gilmore that Orem is familiar with. And she then reveals that her ex that she's been referring to this whole episode is none other than Dariax, the very same Dariax that Orem, was a member of the Crown Keepers with. And so they have this realization, and he's like, "Oh my gosh!" And she's like, "Oh, yeah, I've seen your poster everywhere. You're wanted by the Nameless Ones." And he's like, what?" um, and she says, "Yeah, like Dariax and I were pre-engaged, and we'd been stealing furs. And one day he just left. Then these fur collectors came, so I had to leave. And I've just been tracking him down for months. When I finally found him, and just before getting my hands on him, is when I got teleported here." And that's the gist of their kind of conversations before we have dawn and the night is over and they wake everyone else up. So they said, okay, let's start traveling to the nearest point of civilization that we can find. And as they're going, they now do recognize some of the geography around them. They realize that the mountain to the north of them is the Ascendant Bridge Mountain, which is known to be the tallest in the world. And because of that and another mountain range, which they recognize to be the Sunder Peak mountain range, they realize that they are in Asilra. And as Blake mentioned, they can still see Ruidus kind of far away, but locked in place. And also, Pate returns. I forgot to mention that. He was unable to find the reindeer. And Border's like, it's not a big deal. We weren't that attached. Um, and so Prism's like, well, hey, I have this spell called Find Greater Steed. Like, we can use it to get the reindeer back. And he's like, don't worry about it. Maybe another time. So they're like, okay. And the group decides, all right, well, let's still head to the nearest city. And that's where the episode ends. Once again, this was episode 59, Somewhere Out There, of Critical Role Campaign 3. And as always, if you want to hear our full discussion, be sure to check the link down in the description below.
What a gift of an episode this was.